That's why we're here, right? To discuss. Even when it's heated, it's helpful. Is anyone able to talk about one of the activities that they liked? If you are not, that's okay. So basically, if you can talk about one of the activities and how you would use it with your students, how you might need to change it or alter it so that it would be accessible or more accessible to them.
I have the activities in Usually, but only with one addition. It is when somebody is asked a question, but he does not know what is he asked. He must answer.
Okay.
And when
could you tell us which one you played?
6-5.
6-5. So they played. They're talking now about 6-5. What page was that? 81. 81. 6-5 on 81. Okay.
But I would add the ending of this game. He must justify why.
Why the question?
What would you do if you saw a ghost?
Oh.
And Victor said the person who entered the room not knowing the question, he answered, I will dance with him. So he must justify why.
Oh, that could be fun.
Because in my dreams I see very strange things when I sleep.
You see,
Or I don't like boys, for example. I like only ghosts. It could be fun.
Yeah, okay, great.
And in any case, it must be fun because, the youngsters usually expect some answer, and when they don't, or when they get just the contrary, yes, so it's funny, and they
Additionally,
start
tweak something like that.
starts to discuss or to just
And
speak.
one addition, he must be asked, what will you do if you saw, but you would not be told what he saw. So
they would
the
ask.
direction on the answer will be.
Okay, so what would you do if you saw,
Yeah.
and then they have to answer something?
Yes,
Like
and
I
then
would go to the
justify.
park. Okay, and then justify. Okay, all right. I like that. All right, great. Anyone on this table? At this table, excuse me.
I like Red Rover too. What did you do? Here
And what page is that?
it's 116.
116. They're not quite in order.
Yeah.
As I'm sure you all noticed.
Here I think this exercise requires some creative thinking because you should pick a verb and then to create a question and have a possibility to answer this question with the help of this word the other person picked for you.
Mm-hmm.
So the answers can be theirs and it could be, I think, for younger and as well for older students because we can invent some tricky questions
Mm-hmm.
and it could be also fun for students to because they have a sense of competition or something like jokes, pranks.
Would you need to change it in any way, other than inventing a few more questions?
I don't know.
Probably not, right?
No.
It seems very simple. Good, nice, good share. Okay, anybody else? No? That works for me. We might end a little early today. Before you leave though, the other thing, if any of you teach very young learners, and I don't think anyone here does though, but this shoebox English has a nice description of how you can use a simple shoebox and items inside to go from teaching just basic vocabulary, where you have vocabulary development, to request forms. It's too hard to show you and do it all. To using the word and, colors, numbers and plural forms, adjectives, command forms and prepositions of place, is, are, it, they, have, has, an, comparisons, verb tense practice, verb tense comparisons, modals, phonics, and sight reading, sensory development categories, listening comprehension, creative sentences, and creative storytelling, all with one shoebox. So anyway, this explains how you would do it. If you would like a copy, we can make you one before you go. You would, okay, sure. Just let us know and we'll make you a copy on the copy machine. I really, really like this. And the kids have a lot of fun with it.
And can I add something?
Yeah.
I at my university at the academy used this game with, for example, stationery, which they should know. This public service should know a lot of stationery, you know.
Right, right.
And I put everything in, and then the same kind of activity, but only with
It works for
different
them too, yeah.
vocabulary.
With the
yes.
adults. Great.
Yeah.
Okay,
It works.
I can see why. I mean, it would work with me. I would be happy to play that game. So, here you will see the references for the slides that you just read. Everything has been taken from or adapted from Harmer. Can you wiggle the mouse? Just wiggle the mouse. Yeah, thanks. Oh, yeah. Okay, Teaching and Learning Grammar, published in Longman, or by Longman. And this shenanigans, and this is grammar-focused, interactive EFL activities. And we have 2 copies of this one. Feel free to take a copy, well, not take it, check it out, if you would like. And a lot of the different activities that you just looked at, plus even more, are in these different books. Okay, so that completes our grammar games. Is there any particular thing you would like to talk about or discuss before we finish?
Maybe coming back to grammar,
Mm-hmm.
what is your opinion about it? I noticed that in our country, practically every textbook for children deals with simple tenses. For example, I work, he works. I study, they study. But when I take foreign books for children, they start with continuous, jumping, walking, and so on. So, what is the way how to teach kids from the beginning? So I see a girl and she's jumping, or I see a girl and she jumps. But our books start with, look at our books. They start with simple tenses.
But you can't
and
say,
foreign
I
books.
see a girl and she jumps.
But the book doesn't.
What I would
but she
do
jumps
is-
every day or
I
every
understand.
morning.
I understand.
So-
And when I
Ladies and gentlemen, what I would do is, I mean, obviously you have to use the books that you have, right? So what I would do is I would supplement the information, and maybe I wouldn't specifically teach them like grammar, but I might read them a story that has her jumping, or has someone using actual vocabulary that a child that age would, not vocabulary, sentence structure, grammar structure that a child that age would actually be using. Because one of the things that I find that sometimes occurs, and I don't know enough about your textbooks to say, yes, this is what's happening, or no, this is not what's happening, is that the language, people don't give children the credit that they deserve for language learning. And so sometimes we overly simplify things that they would be able to handle. So what I try to do is I try to do a lot of supplemental activities, like the shoebox English that I just mentioned. There are a lot of fantastic books that we have over in this corner that have what the language would sound like if it were being taught to a native kid, like a native English-speaking child. And I would try to use both, and then maybe occasionally explain what the difference is if the students were really concerned, but sometimes they just pick it up. When they hear the story and they see the story, they end up picking it up on their own. But I definitely, I think it's very important to supplement our textbooks, even with a textbook that is wonderfully written, that's absolutely perfect, if something exists like that. But It's never specific to your context. It's never specific to your students. Each class has a different identity. They have a different way of being. What works with one class won't necessarily work with another. And so just always try to supplement where you see need. That would be my answer. I'm sorry, there's no best answer. There's no best way. But I certainly, if those were my students, I would have a story time. And every day, even up to secondary school, I've done this. But every day we read through a chapter in a story out loud with them listening. And sometimes they're looking at vocabulary tables. A lot of time they're just listening. Part of that is me also wanting students to get back into reading, because I think a lot of the younger generation, they don't enjoy reading as much as we do. It's all like games and this and that, so I'm like, you will listen as I read, and one day you will love it. Or not, but you will at least have read this story. Any other questions, comments?
Again, can
concerns?
I ask another question?
Yes, of course.
What do you find not negative, but something weak in communicative approach? I mean, for example, when we do not correct mistakes, some students make mistakes, but I'm happy that they're talkative, and I pardon them. I not stop them, but maybe it's not right.
Well, I honestly, think of yourself as a language learner. Was it helpful when your teacher corrected you all the time? For me, it was not. And partly because I would be so confused trying to change the sentence that I would forget what I was trying to say. And then the point of the activity, the learning through associating meaning with discourse and communication is lost, because it's then focused on what's right, what's not right. I think it's important to correct them. I think that people who say, well, communicative approach isn't about teaching grammar or teaching correction, that's hogwash. It is. But you have them do the activity, you're taking notes on what errors they're making, and then you're having a mini lesson at the end and saying, so I heard some of us saying this. And then giving the corrections and having a follow-up exercise. Most of the time as teachers, we know the mistakes they're probably going to be making, so we can pre-prepare small exercises and activities that we could give to them just to practice once we've gone over the structure again. There was another point I wanted to make. Communicative. For me, the weakness in communicative is that there's no focus on writing. I shouldn't say there's no focus on writing, but there's less of a focus on writing, and I think writing is important. Because for some students who are kinesthetic, what is that if not kinesthetic? So I think that some people misinterpret communicative to mean only oral, only spoken, very engaging activities, but communicative also, for me, incorporates writing and making sure that the students know how to express themselves through that craft. But I see that in some places there is a weakness. I've noticed with some students that as the communicative approach has been more and more popular, the writing hasn't been as good as previously. But I think that if teachers, if we make a conscious effort to integrate writing in addition to whatever we're doing, that cancels that problem. I think there's no best method, right? All of it, and all of it is based on your students, what their cultural background is, what your cultural background is, blah, 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 blah.
And if I'm allowed, the last question for today. Accuracy is not clear for me. For example, I'm checking something, but I see a spelling mistake. For example, until. I know that until is spelled with one letter L, but students put down like it is what till with two letters. And even if I'm checking something different, but it's your limit, you don't know it, and I include it in the test, I regard this as a mistake, you know.
I don't.
That kind of accuracy should be professionalism.
I think that you can go either way with that. Like, I fully understand your opinion, and I think that's fine. I mean, your students know that that's the expectation. But for me, I wouldn't do that because I want them focusing on the usage of the grammar. If they're focusing on spelling, they may not be focused on what I want them to put all their mental energy in. This may just be me. So I tend to tell students, like, spelling for me is not so much an issue unless it's so wrong I can't even tell what kind of a word it is. Or it's like something like because, which they should have right by that point. Until, for me with the double L, that wouldn't have been such an issue. But again, it's up to you. I mean, like I said, I prefer to have my students focus on the grammar aspect and communicating their message fully. And then hopefully they'll have time to go back and review their test for spelling errors. But what happens if they completed everything, they put all their energies into getting that done, then they didn't have time to review the test for spelling errors, and maybe they would have caught it at that point. I don't feel like I can penalize them for that. With the way that I do catch spelling and do make them not do it again is very 1980s. But as my teachers used to do to me, and I now do with some of my students, I have them write the word 100 times. They get it. They will never spell that word wrong again. Again was the word that I had to do that because I was always spelling it incorrectly. My teacher was like, again! I was like, okay. And then I wrote it 100 times and I never spelled it wrong. But those are with those words I do with students when they're very common words like first, because, second, things that they should know that will appear over and over and over and over again in English.
But you know, for example, every interpreter has a small notebook, a pad. And when you translate, but you put some information briefly about what you're going to translate into another language. And when your colleague or somebody else sees your notes, they never discuss spells of things because it's not the point. You have to catch the information. But how you spell it, it's up to you. Even you know the words, but you're now thinking about how to catch more details, data, some figures, numbers, and so on. So it's not discussed whether your language is poor or not, because, well, you do it for yourself. You even can invent your own language. For example, if I listen a car was moving at speed and I make a note like 65 kilometers or miles an hour, but instead of car I put a symbol.
Okay, was there a question?
No, I want to add that sometimes we don't check accuracy because you think more about information
Right,
you have to remember than about how to keep it right here.
Yeah. Yes, well said. Okay, thank you for your questions. I just wanted to introduce this last book because I read it recently when I was in Thailand on vacation, and it's an extraordinary book by Sidney Poitier, and he's very interesting because he actually comes from the Bahamas, and he was a famous movie star in the 50s and 60s, and you can see just by the color of his skin that was an extraordinary feat, because the U.S. was at that time a very, very racist society, still is in some ways. But he participated in many different feature films, and this was such a moving story. It's a story of his life and his development as a person. And I really, really enjoyed reading this book, and I wanted to just encourage you. We have it here. You may as well read it. It's a nice story. I have a lot of respect for this man. And we may even have some of his movies. I didn't double check. But one of his most famous ones was recently redone, and it was called Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, which he starred in with Katharine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy. And that was in 1968 that movie was. And it was really amazing because at that time he played the boyfriend, fiance of their daughter. And so it dealt with a lot of the race issues of interracial marriage, everything that was coming to the forefront of national thought in American society at that time. So I do recommend that one, and then the one I mentioned earlier. Okay, thank you very much for your attention. Thank you for coming, people who are new. And we hope to see you again. Next week we will talk about VoiceThread on the computer. It's a computer